The house of Kim. The Korean grandmother sat comfortably on the soft tiger skin rug, enjoying the autumn breeze that drifted in through the open door of her apartment. She puffed contentedly at her long pipe while she watched two of her granddaughters playing on the seesaw out in the walled courtyard. The girls were laughing and squealing as they stood upright, one on each end of a board laid across a firm sack of earth. Their long bright colored skirts flew like banners in the wind. Their jet black braids, tied with little red bows, swung back and forth as they jumped up and down so as to toss each other high into the air. But again and again, the old woman's dark eyes were turned away from their play. They sought, instead, the gateway on the far side of the inner court, beside the long, low building which housed the men of the Kim family and which protected the women's quarters from the outer entrance court. Like the little girl who stood just outside her door on the narrow veranda, the women seemed to be listening for some special sound. The men should be coming home, Harmony, the child said, retying the red ribbons that fastened the short green jacket above her long, very full rose-colored skirt. They should be returning, little Okecha, her grandmother replied. The sun has dropped down behind our garden wall. The evening bell soon will be struck. The great gates of the city will swing together. If the master of this house does not make haste, he and the others will spend the night on the highway. It had seemed strange all day to Okecha, with her father and her uncles, her brothers and her boy cousins, all gone from the walled courts of the Kim household. It was the time of the autumn feast of the ancestors, when prayers and thanksgivings must be offered at the family grave mounds out on the hills that encircled the city of Seoul. And of course, only menfolk were important enough to take part in such a ceremony. That morning at sunrise, a little procession had gone forth from the bamboo gate. Leading it was Kim Hong-chip, father of Okecha and oldest son of this Korean grandmother, whom everyone called Harmony. Ever since his father's death, King Hong-chip had borne the important title, Master of the House. In all family ceremonies, he was the leader. Kim Hong-chip was a fine-looking, dignified man. On this day, he was clad as usual in a spotless white jacket and a white baggy pantaloons tied neatly about his ankles above his thick-soled quilted shoes. Over all, he had on his best long green coat that gleamed like silk in the sun. Through the meshes of his tall black hat of woven horsehair, his trim top-knot showed, standing straight up through the opening of his black gauze skullcap. As befitted the master of a Yangban or noble family such as the Kims, he rode out of the city, perched on a sturdy little Korean horse. A servant trotted along beside him at hand to steady his portly, well-fed body over the rough places in the narrow country road. Another servant ran ahead, shouting loudly to the less important wayfarers, "Make way! Make way! A great man comes!" Harmony's younger sons and grandsons, dressed just like the master, hurried to keep their places in the procession. By their top-knots, it was easy to tell which ones were married, for each boy and bachelor in Korea then wore his well-oiled black hair in one long braid down his back. Last of all came the men servants, with brooms to tidy the graveside and with loads of wine, rice cakes, and puddings to please the ancestor spirits. Later, when the prayers all had been said, these good things pleased also their descendants, who picnicked upon them in the family pavilion nearby. "It is good to be born a boy like Young-tu," Okecha said wistfully, coming to sit down at her grandmother's side. The little girl envied her brother, not because he was the oldest son of their father and thus one day would become, like him, master of the house, but just because Young-tu was a boy. He could do so many things that were not permitted then to girls in Korea. He would walk on the street. He could picnic on the hills in the spring or fly kites out there when the winter winds blew. He could even go with his father or the servants to buy toys in the markets and stores of the city. Okisha, now that she was a full 8 years old, would not be allowed to set foot outside the inner court. She would not see the city streets except through the curtains of the sedan chair in which she might go visiting with her mother. When she was married, she would only exchange the inner court of her father's house for that of her husband. It was not that the little Korean girl was unhappy. These were all the customs over her land. Omoni, her busy mother, and Harmony always found ways to occupy and amuse themselves in the inner court. Oh, it was pleasant there. And one could play also in the garden of the green gems behind the women's houses. Okisha knew the inner court was far safer for girls than the city streets with their crowds of rough men. Okisha, Young-do, and their grandmother, as well as the other people in this story, lived many, many years ago. That was before Western ideas and new ways of living came to this Asiatic land of Korea. Before it had long refused to let foreign traders or travelers land on its shores, Korea was nicknamed the Hermit Kingdom. A hermit among the nations it was, shut off to itself like a frog in a well, and knowing almost nothing of the great world beyond its sea coasts. Our little kingdom is like a bone between two dogs, Harmony used to explain. Mighty China to the north and west, and strong Japan to the east would like to swallow it up. She told her grandchildren that by sending thousands of bags of rice and boatloads of rich silk each year to China, the land bought its freedom to live in peace. Thus, it bought also the help of China in keeping away its greedy neighbor Japan. It was only when Japan became so much stronger than China that it was able to conquer Korea. Harmony would have been sad indeed if the blind fortune teller she so often consulted had foretold the long sad years when her land was to be under Japanese rule. These were to last until Korea was set free by World War II. Some say Korea's ancient name of Chosun means land of morning come. Others like better land of morning brightness. In a household like that of the Kims, there were in those times many bright days and many calm days, like this day of the ancestors. But it was never really quiet in the inner court of the rich Kim household. There was the constant rat-a-tat-tat of the ironing sticks in the hands of the maidservants. In this land, the women as well as the men wore chiefly garments of white grass linen, short white jackets, and long white trousers or very full white skirts. The boys and the girls had similar clothes of gayer hues, pale blues, bright greens, and rosy pinks. There was always something to be washed clean and pounded smooth on the flat, oblong ironing stones. There were always sounds too, coming out of the kitchen. Just now, twigs and leaves were being stuffed into the fireplace there, to keep the rice water boiling and to make sure plenty of hot air would flow out from the stove under the floors of the houses. The travelers would be hungry and cold. When they dropped down to rest, they must feel the warmth of the stone floors through the smooth oiled paper coverings. What is it that has only one mouth and yet has three necks? This was a riddle about the kitchen fireplace which Okecha liked to ask. The firebox was the mouth, of course. The three necks were the flues which brought heat from the firebox out under the floors and thus warmed the houses. The great city bell was booming its evening warning when the master of the house was lifted down from his pony. Young-do and the other boys ran at once to the inner court to bring their mothers and Harmony the flaming autumn leaves they had picked out on the hills and to tell them of the day's doings. But the women were busy making ready the evening meal for their husbands and sons. Large bowls were heaped high with steaming rice. Smaller bowls were being filled with bean sauce, fish, and the savory pickle called kimchi. All these bowls were arranged on tiny low tables to be set down on the floor near each hungry man. For drinking, there were bowls of steaming rice water. In Korea in those days, cows were raised for drawing plows or carrying loads, not for giving milk. Only when the men folk had been fed and the women and girls had themselves eaten did the family begin to move across the inner court to Harmony's apartment. The hall of perfect learning, the room where the master received his men guests, were larger. The hall of the ancestors was finer, but Harmony's room was the true center of the Kim household. From her place, here in the inner court, she directed the lives of all of her family. Because of her age and because they loved her so much, she was the true head of the house of Kim. As was the custom of those times, 3 of her sons had brought their brides to live in the Kim family courtyards. Here, all the children were being brought up. There was ample room for them all, for the houses of the Kims were among the richest and most spacious in all the capital city of Seoul. The curving tiled roofs stood out proudly in the sea of grass roofs of the more ordinary houses. The plaster walls of the Kim houses were smoother, and their fine paper windows let in more light than those of its neighbors. In few other homes in Seoul were there more handsome brass-bound clothing chests, more elegantly embroidered screens, not more scholarly wall writings. Harmony specially treasured the thick tiger skins which had covered the official sedan chair of her dead husband. In the master's hall of perfect learning, behind little panels in the walls, there were precious books and rolls of white paper upon which poems had been set down with the skillful brush strokes of scholars. Always young too, there have been poets and scholars in our family, Harmony sometimes said to her grandson. Next, it is you who must bring such honor to our house. Like your grandfather and your great-grandfather, you must learn to make the golden words flow off your rabbit hair brush. You must become a paksa like them, a true master of wisdom. To be a paksa is to mount the dragon of good luck, blessed boy. And one day you too shall pass the emperor's examinations. You too shall win high office, fortune, and fame. Each day the old woman helped Young-do with his lessons. Harmony knew how to read and write Umun, the people's language, whose words were formed with the letters of the Korean alphabet. But by helping her own sons and her grandsons, she had learned also many of the sayings of the old Chinese scholars. The stories Harmony told the children often sounded as fine to them as the poems the father wrote in his wall of perfect learning. It was Harmony who had chosen the poetic names of her grandchildren. Okisha loved her name, which meant jade child, for everyone knew that smooth gleaming jade is the most precious of stones. Yongtu was proud to be called Dragonhead, because a dragon is the most splendid of all beasts, and his name was sure to bring good luck. Yongtu was glad he did not have a name like that of his baby brother, whom Harmony called Little Pig. That name was only for his baby years, to be sure. It was chosen to fool the spirits into thinking he was not worthy of being carried away. Later it would be changed to a more honorable title, perhaps Fierce Leopard or Great Mountain. When the pipes were lighted and everyone was squatting at ease on mats on the warm floor, Kim Homship began to tell Harmony about the events of the ancestors' feast. Our grave mounds are well placed, he began. The sun falls upon them from the south, and the hills lead to them like the waving back of a dragon. No spying peak peers down upon them over the ridge. The hills opposite stand up straight and firm, like men set there to protect them. The honorable ancestor spirits should be well pleased, and good luck should live with us. The duty to their ancestors was even more important to Koreans than the honor they paid their living parents. The Kims all believed that each person who mounted the dragon to heaven took only one of his 3 souls with him. A second dwelt in the grave mound, a third rested in his little white wooden tablet in the ancestor's apartment in the family courts. On the appointed days of the year, the master with his oldest son at his side knelt in this tablet house. They bowed their heads to the floor, saying the family prayers. The need for sons to carry on these ceremonies for the ancestors was one reason why boys in Korea were thought to be so much more important than their sisters. Okesha and Yongdu always jumped to do their father's bidding. They stood in awe of this dignified man, whose word was law in their house. He never paid much attention to them, nor showed how much he loved them, for that would be boasting. The children ran quickly also when their grandmother called, but that was because they liked so well to be with her. Their greatest pleasure was to sit by her side and listen to the strange tales she brought forth from the treasure house of her memory. Harmony knew by heart stories about the ancient Chinese teacher Confucius. She could tell of the adventures of the good Buddha, who lived long ago in India over the mountains far beyond China. But the stories her grandchildren liked best were about the spirits and animals of their own land, the fierce tiger kings of the mountains, the good river dragons, and the togabis, mischievous little elves who hid under the curving tiled roofs. Every mishap in the household, the children blamed on these togabis, poor wandering spirits who had never found their way up to heaven. A tear in a paper window pane, a lid falling into a boiling pot, the evening rice burned. All these were surely the work of the togabis. The children thought. If you should ever meet a togabi, Harmony told the children, stand up so straight and proud that you look down upon them. Take out a bit of shining silver, a strip of red cloth, or a charm made from the wood of a lightning-struck tree. Then he will go away. Along the ridges of the Kim roofs stood tiny clay figures of strange animals and ugly little men, put there to frighten the bad spirits away. A picture of the fat kitchen god was kept on the god shelf over the stove to prevent them from spoiling the family meals. Okesha and Dongyu had learned always to step high over a threshold, lest they tread on the good guardian spirit of the house, who might be lying across it. They knew there were good spirits as well as bad. One could never be sure which were about. It was well to be careful. As real to Harmony and her grandchildren as their ancestor spirits were all these unseen beings. When the old grandmother told of a man turned into an ox, of a cat whose fur dripped rice, or of a woodcutter who came upon the gods of the mountain playing at chess, they were sure such things could happen. I heard these tales from my own grandmother, Harmony used to say. How then can they not be true?